Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Getting MDR Clinical Evaluations Right. We're going to wait just a few minutes. We see some folks are still coming online, so we'll start in about 2 minutes. All right, I think we've got almost everyone on. Welcome. Thank you for joining our webinar today. What we'll be covering today is getting MDR clinical evaluations right. We're specifically focused on dental products, and today's webinar will be very practical guidance for dental device manufacturers. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll do a quick introduction to Celigence and to our fabulous speakers today, and then we'll jump right into the overview. We will do questions. We've got time for questions at the end, and just hold your questions. You'll be able to put them in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll answer everything there at the end. Do you mind just going back one slide, Priya? Thank you. Oops, sorry, 2 slides. So quick background on Celigence. We are a regulatory consulting company. We have both technology and services, including EU MDR medical writing. We've been supporting clients with EU MDR work since 2018. We help clients with a lot of CERs, CEPs, PMCF plans and reports, everything needed both for that initial transition to MDR as well as ongoing MDR maintenance. One of the reasons we're doing this webinar and focusing specifically around dental products is when we started doing this work in 2018, several of our early clients were dental manufacturers. And we have dental subject matter experts on staff, including dental surgeons and physicians. And because of that, we've got very deep expertise in the dental medical product space. We've learned over the years that dental products have unique challenges and unique needs under EU MDR, particularly around clinical evidence and the benefit risk summary. And our speakers will be covering some of those details, lessons learned, and key tips for you as we go through. If you want to go on to the next slide. One of the things that's unique about Celigence is when we do our EU MDR writing, we use a lot of technology that we built in-house. We have our own proprietary system called Captus that our team uses for all of our EU MDR medical writing, and we also license to clients. We leverage AI and automation so that we're able to do CERs and other MDR documents much more quickly than doing it manually. And it's easier to have everything put together in a nice package for the notified body. And that's been very helpful as we do some of the dental MDR writing for our clients, as well, of course, as the standard medical devices. So that's a little bit about us. And then let me tell you about our two experienced speakers today. So we have on our panel, if you want to just go over to that next slide, Manaswathi Banerjee. She's a dental physician, master's in public health, and she's one of our lead writers on EU MDR clinical and post-market documents, one of our subject matter experts for everything around dental medical devices and the work that we do for clients at Celligence. And then Priya Ray Chaudhary is our clinical affairs lead. She's been working on clinical affairs for medical and dental devices for over 10 years. Again, one of our in-house experts, specifically around EU MDR, and does a lot of work for our dental manufacturer clients. And so they'll be sharing what they've learned and what we've learned as a company over the last 7+ years, working specifically with dental products and EU MDR. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our fabulous speakers, and they've got some great material to share with you about lessons learned and key tips, some very practical advice for working with dental products on EU MDR. All yours.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that kind introduction. Hi, everyone. Good evening, good morning, and a very, very warm welcome to our session. We are thrilled to have all of us join today, whether we are tuning in from regulatory, clinical affairs, or other product development teams. So welcome to all. The purpose of today's session is designed to be both informative and practical, as mentioned by Erin. It would contain a real-world walkthrough of how to plan, execute, and refine clinical evaluation activities. So here's what we'll be covering today. We'll begin with the clinical evaluation planning, how to design the CEP to reflect the real-world device use and align with the GSPRs. Next, we will dive into the evidence strategy, including how to build a solid literature plan, appraise the clinical data, and define measurable performance endpoints. We'll move on to the execution of the CER and collection of the PMCF, the data analysis of the PMCF. And we'll talk about something about how and when of gathering real-world data post-market. And then we will move on to the common pitfalls and the measures that we have taken as service providers for these long. And finally, we will close the session with some key takeaways and a quick poll. So with that, let's begin by setting the foundation of why exactly dental devices that we have chosen today. For that, I would like to request my colleague, Dr. Manaswita, to comment on the importance of picking the subject as of today. Manaswita, all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Priya, and thank you, Erin, for the introduction. So let us start by addressing a question that is central to this entire session. Why dental devices? Within dentistry, medical devices come with many materials and applications. They have direct patient interface, which means, for example, dental devices, particularly implants and abutments, they directly interact with human tissue. They integrate into the bone, gingiva, soft tissues, and in many cases, they stay in the body permanently. And because of this direct interaction, there is significant biological response which might trigger risks such as inflammation, peri-implantitis, mechanical failure, or even result in bone loss. This is why regulators expect deeper insight into how device performs over time, besides short-term trials. And if you see, they are most widely used globally. Dental implants and related restorations are among the most commonly placed medical devices after lenses and orthopedic components. Approximately 18 million dental implants are annually sold, and greater than 1,300 types of dental implants are available. And this number is only growing due to the aging population and increased access to cosmetic dentistry. With such widespread usage, any clinical risk can lead to public health concerns. Thus, this requires pre-market and post-market evaluation. Also, dental devices are known for longevity, safety, and aesthetics. The success of any dental implant is not only measured by how long it lasts, but also how it appears and performs functionally, all of which affect the patient's quality of life. Thus, when deriving the outcome parameters in a clinical evaluation, a multi-dimensional approach is essential, considering the biological integration, mechanical performance, and patient satisfaction. And also, they typically or classified as class 2A or B or even higher regulatory bar. Let us move to the next slide to understand the classification of dental devices. The classification of dental devices has changed under the MDR compared to MDD framework, which was present earlier. As per the Medical Device Coordination Group document, MDCG 2021 and 24, if you see, these are the examples. For example, like class 1 devices or rubber dam, varnishes, spatulas, periodontal probes, and class 2, like dental fillings, tooth crowns, liners, and whereas dental implants and their abutments are class 2B. Products such as resorbable bone materials, cements, endodontic filling materials, including a drug, or even animal-derived bone graft substitutes all fall into the highest risk class, class 3. Further, all devices that contain nanomaterials are classified into the highest risk class. Under the old MDD, many of these devices are considered low risk. MDR has upclassified, enforcing stricter classification rules. Let us take some examples of dental devices that are upclassified under MDR. Dental implants under MDD were generally classified as class 2A or 2B, and now under MDR, they're clearly classified as class 2B if not placed in the teeth, or even class 3 if the implants are biologically coated or resorbable. Similarly, bone replacement materials like bone grafts used in implant surgery, especially if they have a biological effect, or wholly or mainly absorbed or upclassified as class 3. Further, softwares that influence treatment decisions are now classified as class 2A or 2B. Even if the treatment decisions could impact a patient's survival, they're classified as class 3. So what are the implications of these upclassifications? One of the major impact is that for the manufacturers that there is no grandfathering rule. All the medical devices which are approved under MDD have to be reapproved under MDR. This means new conformity assessments for all the medical devices complying with the new regulations and new rules. This means new clinical evidence that aligns with the risk levels and the intended use. So under MDD, claiming equivalence was a popular route to CE marking, as no separate or new clinical investigations has to be undertaken. However, under the MDR, equivalence has to be demonstrated considering technical, biological, as well as clinical factors. It has to be shown by the manufacturer that the device which is being evaluated is not clinically, biologically, or technically different to an equivalent device. So depending upon the risk class of a device, the conformity assessment required submission of clinical evaluation reports, post-market clinical follow-up plans, and in addition, for implants on class 3 devices, an implant card or a summary of safety and clinical performance shall be provided by the manufacturers. It means more scrutiny, more data, and more accountability of how these devices perform clinically. So here the key takeaway is that the new clinical evaluation causes a lot of extra work and cost to the manufacturers, especially those who manufacture the high-risk devices. So over to you, Priya, to discuss on the regulatory framework. Thank you.
Thanks for that explanation, Manaswita. Now that we have seen why dental devices need focused clinical evaluation and how they are classified, let's have a look at the regulatory foundation that governs all of this. So these 4 elements, if you see here, the 1 and 4 can be again grouped together. Sorry, the 2 and 4 can be grouped together, form the backbone of the clinical and the post-market obligations. So the first one, as all of us know, Article 61 is the starting point. It clearly states that all medical devices, regardless of the class, must undergo clinical evaluation. For specially classes 2 and B, which comprises of the highest risk, moderate to high risk, which many dental implants and bone graft materials fall into, would require a robust documentation, such as the clinical evaluation, planning, and reporting, so that it meets the safety and performance requirements throughout its entire life cycle. So if we cannot really rely on the equivalence or existing data, we will need to have the own clinical investigations. Next is Annex 14, which comprises of the 14B, outlines how clinical evaluation should be conducted and maintained. It's not just a one-time activity, as I said, of getting CE marked. It should be throughout the life cycle of the device. So this is especially important for dental implants where longevity and patient-specific factors can dramatically affect the performance over time. And now while we are evaluating the device, every data point that we collect should fed back into the general safety and performance requirements, otherwise called as GSPRs in Annex 1. So these cover everything from biocompatibility, the risk of contamination, any kind of mechanical failure, risks from all of them, from packaging, and especially the clinical performance. Sorry for that. For example, if the claim is, let's say a device is claiming a minimal bone loss at 12 months, the clinical evaluation must show that the data aligns with the general safety and performance requirements, whatever we are claiming as part of our Annex 1 conformity. And finally, Part B of Annex 14 outlines the requirements of the post-market clinical follow-up, the PMCF. So PMCF can be achieved. It's again a key requirement of collecting the real world performance and safety data, which is essential and requirement nowadays by almost all the notified bodies, irrespective of the classes of the device, through various sources like surveys, case series, case studies, registry tracking, literature, as well as PMCF study if there is. So for dental devices, this is critical again if it leads to some trending bone loss or late onset inflammation due to biocompatibility issues, implant survivals. All of these must be monitored beyond the CE mark of the device. So together, these components ensure that the device is not only safe and effective, but continues to be year after year. So up next, we'll explore how this life cycle flows practically, starting with the CEP and leading into the clinical data collection. All right. So as depicted, everything starts with the clinical evaluation plan, the CEP. This document sets the stage. It outlines what we are evaluating, which claims that we should justify, what kind of data we will collect, the sources of clinical data that we will collect, and how will we appraise the data. Everything needs to be documented as part of the CEP. It also describes how we will address the gaps. For example, if the implant is too new for a long-term literature, the plan may include the PMCF right away. So it cannot go with a justification. And then again, based on the CEP, the next step is to gather the clinical data, which again includes the literature, which forms the major chunk of the clinical data mining as part of the CER. PMS data comprising of complaints, feedbacks, trend reports, vigilance. And for dental devices registries, many kind of registries specific to region or any kind of dental therapeutic bodies from various countries can be definitely leveraged as part of the clinical data mining as part of the CER, especially on long-term integration and failure rates that we were talking about. Now that the data is collected, we should appraise it, which means evaluating the data with respect to the study quality, relevance of the device, whether it supports the claims made. So if the device shares technical, biological, and clinical characteristics if we are claiming an equivalence, the equivalent device and wherever it appears as part of the clinical literature should be appraised with a correct appraisal criteria. And then everything gets synthesized into the report, which is the clinical evaluation report, which summarizes the evidence. It assesses the benefit-risk balance. It aligns with the GSPRs in Annex 1 and clearly documents the conclusions and limitations. And then based on the CER and any residual uncertainty, the designing of the PMCF plan should be done. So for dental devices, this could include 12-month patient satisfaction surveys, 6 months, depending on the class of the device and again, the intended purpose and the indication and the number of patients using it. Case series can also be a part of it, but again, it should be documented in a collated form. So as we want to reiterate that PMCF nowadays is not an option unless it is specifically justified. It forms a key part of the life cycle, especially for 2B and 3 devices. And finally, the evaluation should be revisited and updated based on new literature, PMCF findings, any kind of product change in materials, any kind of trend in the complaints, etc. So this is the overall cycle of the clinical evaluation process. As you know, the CER is not just a document, it's a complete strategy. The CEP is a complete strategy, and now that's what the MDR expects from the manufacturer. All right, so now let's talk about the heart of the clinical evaluation. As we were talking about the clinical evaluation plan, it's, as I said, that it's a roadmap. It guides the clinical evaluation from start to finish. Let's have a quick walkthrough with 5 key building blocks of a robust CEP, especially for dental products. The first and the most critical is clearly defining the intended use and the clinical indications. For a dental implant, which means it can be very much targeted and specific. For example, is it for anterior or posterior teeth? Is it meant for immediate loading or delayed placement? Is it for single unit or full arch restoration, the classification of the restorations, etc. So the more precise it is, the more focused the data collection and evaluation can be. It's also very much important to mention the target population, the age groups, the contraindications, like who is the device for? Is it for adult patients with partial bone loss, full bone loss, postmenopausal women with bone loss, pediatric applications, etc. So any kind of contraindications, for example, people with uncontrolled diabetes or those undergoing any kind of therapy that may have an impaired healing, the CEP should reflect that the device is clinically evaluated within the actual populations it's intended for. And then next, the most important part is the state-of-the-art literature, which is the baseline for comparison. So this, as we have come a long way, we know that it should contain what is the current clinical standard for that therapeutic area, what materials and technologies are considered as best practices, are comparing to, let's say, a kind of titanium grade 5 implants to zirconia, okay, are hybrid coatings in the scope, and then identify the benchmark devices. So if parity or superiority is claimed, this is where it should be shown. So this step also ties into the equivalence strategy, if applicable. Now coming to the claims and clinical endpoints, every claim that we make must be clinically justified, and here's the key. So if we sell implants, let's say in 8 mm, 10 mm, and various kinds of length, each must be covered, especially if their behavior could vary. And also, we should define what a success means. For example, successful osseointegration should be defined as a successful osseointegration of less than or more than or equal to 90% for a period of 12 months. And if we are tracking aesthetic outcomes or survival rates, we should also mention the same with a quantifiable justification. So these claims should later link directly into the data and generation of the PMCF plan. Moving on. Right, so we won't spend much long on this slide, but I want to highlight one key point under EU MDR, especially for legacy dental devices. Literature is often the most only viable source of clinical data. So a robust clinical search strategy becomes the primary tool to demonstrate safety, performance, and the state of the art, all of them, particularly when equivalence is no longer accepted or when we do not have our own clinical investigation. So that's why building a correct search strategy. For example, we are only researching on adults. We should also include pediatric population, any kind of specific targeted population like missing molars, the biocompatibility or the safety of that material, let's say titanium or zirconia, the period of follow-up, let's say 12 to 24 months, these are all essential. So applying smart filters like recent studies, meta-analysis, which would generate quantifiable values through the studies are essential. And going beyond the conventional databases like PubMed or Cochrane, we should also include other gray literature databases as well. And implant registries, as we spoke about, to cover real-world outcomes. So while this step looks simple, it's actually the cornerstone of a defensible CR. Right, so once the literature search is completed, the next step is to critically appraise the literature data, what was found, and this is especially important in the dental space where clinical data can be quite variable in format and quality. So the scoring system which we most of us used to follow, which were given in the MedDef 2.7 Rev 4, is a solid baseline, and it can be changed and made to apply based on the quality of data that we are looking for, the scoring system that we can follow based on our SOPs. Most probably, it's the widely accepted one by the notified bodies. So, for example, in cohort studies, the focus shifts to sample size and dropouts, so we can change it accordingly. And finally, as I said, that once we have reviewed each study, assigning a quality score based on how strong and relevant it is for the device and claims is essential. So this process of structured appraisal is what turns search results into usable, defensible data into the CER. Okay. So now we bring to you two of the most commonly found case that we have got to work with among various clients throughout our career. So this is the first one. So let's walk through the first example, which is a simple dental X-ray companion. It's a software. It's a simple software, which is class 1. So this tool processes pre-existing dental X-ray images of the bite wings, periapical films, or any kind of panoramic images, and enhances them to highlight the areas where a plaque or calculus might be present. Now, it's important to note that this device is non-diagnostic, meaning it does not provide a diagnosis or interpretation of any kind of disease. It simply enhances the image to aid a professional or a physician for the decision-making or patient therapeutic purpose. So because it doesn't guide treatment or automatically detect any kind of pathology, it is qualified as class 1 under Rule 11, assuming that it does not introduce any kind of risk through an active decision support. Right. So now this is how we have come up in supporting some of the claims that this class of the device, considering the intended purpose and the indication of it. These are the four of them, the 4 clinical claims we can show you right in today's session. These are non-diagnostic claims, again, meaning the device does not interpret or diagnose any pathology. The first and the 4 most fundamental claim is that this device improves visibility of areas where plaque or calculus might accumulate. So this is the intended purpose. So this can be supported by a concordant study, let's say more than, or a cohort study, or any kind of RCTs that we can find out through literature, which shows more than 85% agreement with expert annotations in defined zones. So any kind of cohorts which talk about a comparative data gathering between automated and manual imaging. The next one is that it supports plaque and calculus tracking over time. So this device enables users, whether clinicians or patients or any kind of users, to visually compare radiographs over time, like before and after, let's say, an intervention or a treatment. So while it does not measure change, it helps track visual consistency, which can support oral hygiene monitoring. So this is typically validated through usability studies, clinician feedback. Here comes the PMCF again. And then it improves detection of radiopaque buildup versus raw X-rays. So this claim focuses on contrast enhancement, which we were talking about the comparative study, if the manufacturer has done something internally, or we can gather the data through literature. For example, for supporting the studies, let's say more than 80% of test users rate the enhanced versions are more helpful in identifying the potential buildup. And finally, it enables subgingival contrast improvement. So one of the most valued features in dental imaging is its ability to improve contrast in subgingival and interproximal areas where a plaque often hides. So if contrast ratio improvement is shown to be more than 25% in enhanced images by the software compared to the original, that provides a strong technical validation for this claim. Yeah, so these were all the claims that we could draft, and which points out to the first example of this session. Now with that, I will now move the slides to Manasvita to walk us over another example device and how clinical evaluation plays out in that context. Manasvita?
Yes, Priya, thank you. So we will be looking at titanium dental implant system, which is class 2B. If you see, as the MDR places greater importance on the role of clinical evidence to establish safety and performance, the clinical evaluation report should consider the clinical risks and benefits associated with the device when used as intended. Here, if you see, the intended purpose of this device is to restore masticatory function by supporting fixed or removable dental prosthesis in partially or fully edentulous adult patients via endosseous placement in the upper and lower jawbone. So here, the clinical data has to be sufficient of sufficient quality and quantity, looking at the indications of the device. So if you see here, the clinical benefits when we represent in the clinical evaluation report should be measurable and meaningful, and the outcome parameters should be listed, and the clinical endpoints should be measurable. And also all of these claims and benefits are to be supported by the state-of-the-art evidence, not only from the data not only from the post-market and pre-market surveys, non-clinical and clinical studies, PMS data, which should demonstrate that the DUV meets or expects the clinical benefits outcome parameters. If you see here, one of the clinical benefit is improved appearance of the dental implant. It should look like and feel like a tooth. For this, we have taken from the state-of-the-art evidence that no implants were lost or fractured during the observation period with the implants, uh, showing 100% success rate. The cumulative implant survival rate was around 98% after 7 years, and one implant failed due to implant um, stability, non-maintenance. So all these kind of evidences are to be submitted. And the other clinical benefit here is restored chewing functions. So one of the sign of a successful implant is osseointegration, and also increase or decrease in the bone loss. So here again we have taken from the SOTA, the literature, as well as the other studies, the mean increase in the bone height and width when compared to the follow-up and the baseline periods. So now I request Priya to give some insights into the clinical risks and data mapping further.
Thank you, Manasvita. Right, so this slide brings together the typical clinical risks that we may expect with two different dental devices that we have discussed. The first one, class 1 dental imaging software, and a class 2B implant. So while the risk types are quite different, perceptual versus procedural, the approach to identifying and justifying these risks is consistent under the EU MDR as per the guidance provided by the various MDCG and the white papers that we find from the notified bodies. These are heavily dependent on evidence sourced through the clinical evaluation process, mostly through the literature. So the first step in building a clinical risk profile is to collect data from various sources, as I said. The first one is the literature, the post-market surveillance report, various other vigilance databases on similar devices, validation studies, technical studies, and for softwares, it's the human factors engineering or the usability studies play important roles in them. So among these, clinical literature remains one of the most critical tools, especially for benchmarking the frequency of adverse outcomes. So we need to define the safety and performance, indicated safety and performance parameters before moving on to collection of the data on the actual device or the equivalent device in question. So for example, if we are assessing peri-implantitis in titanium implants, the literature might show that it occurs in 12 to 18% of patients over a period of 5 years. So depending on patient habits and hygiene, this might these factors also might be considered as part of evaluating the percentage. And then the CER should document that rate and then assess how is the device being compared in the clinical data based on the clinical data of the device. So whether it's aligned with the state of the art from the similar devices or the best practices from the social papers that we are supposed to find. And if the design or labeling mitigates the risk to a reasonable level. So that's the ultimate aim of the clinical evaluation. So similarly for the dental imaging software, if studies show that clinicians misinterpret software generated overlays in about, let's say, 5 to 10% of the reviewed cases. So this could be again documented and compared with software performance data, the PMS findings, and the PCF findings again. So we typically recommend as service providers to adding a quantifiable value, let's say a percentage of occurrence, depending on the or a ratio if it is applicable to the application in question in the CR risk table. So even if the number is an estimate from the literature. So it gives the notified bodies a quantitative risk baseline and allows to evaluate whether the benefit risk profile is acceptable compared to published best practices and current expectations. Moving on. Now this slide brings together the benefit risk assessment of the same example we have taken here and shows how we align them with the EU appropriate analysis method. Starting with the class 1 dental x-ray software, which is again a non-diagnostic SAMD, the primary benefits we have generated here. First one is enhanced visibility of plug-driven areas on right wing and periapical x-rays, and it helps clinicians make better hygiene-related decisions. So since this device does not diagnose or measure, its benefits are indirect and typically documented using qualitative evidence, since the data on them is usually less, either with the manufacturers themselves or the literature. So they are not often justified with a huge patient population. So the sample size is really, really low. Like usability feedback or clinical preference studies, internal studies that we rely on. However, this does not mean that the evidence is soft. For example, if 85% of clinicians confirm the improved visibility, we should be able to justify the same, even if we gather qualitative data. And let's say the misinterpretation rates stay under 5%. That supports a solid benefit risk conclusion. And definitely this can be considered provided these insights are captured through proper PMS literature and properly assessed and concluded literature appraisal system. And if we compare that to the titanium dental implant, which is a class 2B device, the benefits are direct, measurable, and patient impacting, which is almost all the cases of moderate to low to moderate risk devices. So a 98%, let's say, implant survival rate for a span of 7 years, maintenance of bone height, and then another claim may be clear restoration of chewing function. So all these are benefits that could be generated out of it. But with that, high scrutiny will also come along with that. For example, we need to acknowledge the risks like peri-implantitis, which occurs in about 12 to 18% of patients in long term. We should be able to define a date or span. Mechanical failures, which is most often, such as loosening of the fracture, typically about, let's say, 1 to 2%. In such cases, qualitative arguments aren't enough. So the notified bodies expect quantitative evidence, like from long-term clinical studies, real-world registry data. So clinical studies, most often, it's not feasible for many manufacturers. So the literature is the key. and the PMCF, which comprises of the real world registry or any kind of feedback data, and well-documented complaint rates. So all are compared with the state-of-the-art quantifiable values that we have generated as part of the safety and performance parameters to demonstrate that the residual risk of the device is not only acceptable, but also expected. So why quantitative methods are preferred for high-risk devices? Because they definitely provide an objective proof. They provide predictable thresholds and traceable benefit risk justification, especially based on the GSPRs that we have cleaned. So as I said, for class 1 devices with minimal risk, qualitative insights may still be sufficient, but even then they must be structured and benchmarked through the state of the art, and the strategy of the clinical data collection system must be well documented and defined in the CER, especially the CEP. Okay, so now that we have seen how benefit risk mapping tools for dental devices, let's quickly talk about where that evidence comes from. We know that it's the clinical literature. So this is often the primary source of quantifying both benefits and risks. It also helps benchmark the device against the state of the art, which is the ultimate claim. Next are the PMS and PMCF data. So this gives a real world validation. If let's say we are claiming a low image distortion for the SAMD device, post-market feedback should support that. Then there's a risk management file, the risk management system or protocol that every manufacturer follows based on the ISO 14971. It should be again reflected in the CER and weighed against the documented benefits. And finally, we have to align all of this with the best practices as per the state of the art that we have generated. In short, the CER should connect the real world data to the real claims that we are making, using these sources to tell a complete compliant benefit risk story. So I would like to stop here and thank you for the attention throughout. Here I would like to have a quick poll on the most common challenges you face as manufacturers of dental devices or as medical writer or clinician who are processing clinical evaluation strategies. I hope it will not take more than a minute. So here we go. We will give you a couple of minutes for the completion.
It looks like everybody has responded now.
All right. Great. So I think the most common challenge is, oh, it's a mixed bag. Yeah, so I think all of us now know that how to generate a good state-of-the-art and benchmark definition. So the main problematic areas are addressing the notified body feedback. I agree. Followed by appraising the clinical evidence, which we again face a lot of comments, and then finally the PMCF planning. All right. Thank you so much for your time and attention in answering the questions. We will look at a few of the challenging stories that we could derive in today's session. So let's go. All right, so now starting with the most common pitfalls, as you correctly said, the generic clinical claims. So most often now that we know how to generate clinical claims through literature, through the state of the art, but still we kind of get comments on vague ones, especially when it comes to the qualitative claims without solid foundation of the study data through literature. For example, if we say safe and effective, or safer and more effective without a benchmark technique or a comparative device or a comparative study group in question, all of these would definitely be pointed out while assessing the clinical evaluation report by the notified body. So the MDR and as well as the MDCG says that all the claims should be specific, measurable, and clinically justified. So for example, if we are claiming that 98% implant survival rate for over 7 years is a strong and audit-proof statement that cannot be questioned, it has a really less chance of being questioned by notified bodies. Right, so the next one is one of the most common pitfall that we have observed is with respect to the equivalence justification. So it's kind of a trend where we may not be able to assess the safety and the performance differences when it comes to a difference in the material of buildup of any kind of implant or dental devices which comes into contact with the human tissues. For example, if we are comparing titanium and zirconia implants, so even though it seems to be biocompatible, they define in biofilm behavior or fracture resistance. Let's say we are claiming that it has a nanomaterial, which is kind of a novel feature of the device or the implant. However, the equivalent device does not have such a feature or the material, but still we go ahead and claim the equivalence. So they can definitely question without a proper justification of the implication of the safety and performance of the two. And then weak linkage between claims and evidence is the most common one. So even if we do not have such data to address a gap, it is essential for a manufacturer to have a PMCF plan in place. So let's say if we know the gap in our clinical evaluation report, however, we are unable to find the data for it, we should have a solid foundation of the PMCF with which we will have to justify that through the PMCF study questionnaire. And this is the data collection system that we have eventually to address the gap. And of course, the state of the art, we all know that it should not be outdated, especially when it comes to the legacy devices. Even if legacy devices have a solid foundation of the clinical data, but it's ideal to be updated and pass through the MDR compliance. It should be updated every 5 years to 7 years based on the therapeutic area that we are talking about. And finally, the most important one that we spoke about is the PMCF. We saw that it's most often treated as a formality we can go ahead and justify, but it should be risk driven and based on the data gaps that is there in the clinical evaluation. And the higher the risk of the device, higher the chances of foreseeable risks to be present. So if the clinical uncertainty is, let's say, long-term bone loss, and stuff like that. So PMCF must gather data on that for a particular period and with the proper justification of the data collection sources and the data collection system that we are making as part of the PMCF plan. Right. So now to help us navigate these challenges, we have come across these challenges and tried to mitigate through our career. I will hand over to Manaswita, who will walk us through some practical strategies and examples for addressing each of these pitfalls effectively in the CER. So, Manaswita?
Yes, Priya. Thank you. So let us briefly touch on overcoming pitfalls through strategic solutions. The first one is developing a scoring matrix for evidence appraisal, then justifying claim evidence linked with benchmarks, and also like Priya suggested, the SOTA should not be outdated, and we have to thus refresh it every 12 to 24 months, and also align PMCF goals with the CER uncertainties. And here I would like to give an example of a case where Saligence has taken up a post-market clinical follow-up user experience survey for a composite resin. The objective of the survey was to determine clinician satisfaction, feedback, clinical outcomes, and ease of use, and performance and safety information such as identification of hazard, restoration loss, fracture rate, and secondary caries rate, etc. So this is to meet the requirements of uncertainties in the CER, and we created a detailed survey questionnaire, followed statistical sampling methods, executed and collected the data, and reported the results. So this example shows how a PMCF can be conducted, and with this I hand over to Priya to discuss on the closure slides.
Yep. And just a quick time check. We've got about 9 minutes and we've already got several questions. So if you want, I know you're getting close to wrapping up. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you. So I will just close the session following to the last challenge that we were discussing on the PMCF. So this is the last slide for this session, and apologize for dragging it so long. So yeah, since we have come to the closure, I would like to discuss one of the most common pitfalls that we have spoken about, the PMCF. So as Manaswita mentioned, that it was a class 2A implantable dental restoration device. If you see on the left, we could see a few typical PMCF data sources which similar device manufacturers can follow, which are the targeted literature on similar device or materials, especially driven to the performance and safety criteria that we have. Then structured questionnaires, of course, sent to clinicians or patients, surveys to track usability, and in some cases, prospective PMCF studies can also be planned, particularly when durability or the risk tolerance is being monitored for a longer duration. If you see some example questions we have set out here, so whether the restoration remained intact and functional at 6 to 12 months, which is again considering the fact that what we are claiming as part of the CEP. Now, any reported soft tissue irritation or any kind of hypersensitivity that the patient might face, or failure events like fracture, debonding, replacement, etc. And these are directly tied to the performance and safety endpoints that we have defined in the CR again, and which will help close the loop on the clinical uncertainties which are highlighted through appraisal of the SOTA literature. Even case reports work as a mode of PMCF data, although we have not used it as part of our system and ever. But I have seen people using PMCF sources as case studies and club them together in the form of a case series, which was eventually published. So it definitely indeed requires, a lot of patient sampling, and it might lead to a broad gap and lack of data. All right, so with that, we come to the end of the session. And before closing, I would like to highlight some key takeaways, and then we will move on to the Q&A. So these are the 5 key points reflecting the core of the strong, the MDR compliant clinical evaluation strategy that we have discussed today. A device-specific clinical strategy is not just helpful, it's essential. Clearly defined intended use and clinical claims provide the foundation for a foolproof CER. Literature search and data appraisal, they must be rigorous and systematic. And quantification of the data that whatever we are mining out of the CER should be objectively documented into the CER based on the CEP and the strategy. And finally, the risk-benefit analysis must be evidence-driven and grounded to the clinical reality and the therapeutic area. All right, so with that, the session returns to Erin, and if you kindly guide us to the Q&A. Thank you.
Yes, great job. Terrific insight. And we've already got a few questions. If anyone else would like to put anything in the chat, we'll start going through this. The first one is, what level of clinical evidence are notified bodies looking for in new devices and well-established technologies? For example, dental filling materials.
Sorry, Erin, can you please repeat? I think I lost you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. What level of clinical evidence are notified bodies looking for in new devices in well-established technologies? And the example this person gave is such as dental filling materials.
Yeah, so it's dental filling material calls for class 2A or class 2B, depending on the intended purpose. So if it is a well-established technology, definitely it is expected that the manufacturer has most of the data already generated based on the state of the art. But as it has to go through another round of clinical evaluation through MDR, we should be, the strategy placed in the clinical evaluation plan should be strategy driven. So if the claims the manufacturer has already are addressed, then through all the types of sources of clinical data, for example, literature, they are well appraised and strategically, systematically documented in the CR. And when we are talking about any kind of gaps with respect to any kind of novel materials that are used in this kind of device, which I expect not, because since it's a well-established technique, if it is, definitely we have to address the gaps through the PMCF. And yeah, and the rest of the system, since it's a well-established technology, again, it is expected that the PMCF, the PMS is well structured. And yeah, I think that's all. And finally, the biocompatibility and the non-clinical tests that are required for it is an essential requirement as part of the GSPR. So yeah, for a well-established technology, again, just to highlight, well-established technology does not always mean that it will not require a PMCF. It will definitely be required to be supported with a PMCF if it is a high risk class. And definitely for implant, it is required.
Thanks, Priya. Next question. I think this is similar actually to the first example you shared. The question is, what should the go-to strategy be for a device that does not have any clinical claims, but is intended to be used as a tool or accessory for the medical device in positioning or localizing?
Yeah, so if, let's say, if a device does not have a clinical claim or a clinical benefit, there are two options. The first option is it might fall under the Article 6110 devices, which will not require any kind of clinical data supporting it, but definitely requires benchmarking as part of the state of the art without a clinical data generated, if at all it is classified as Article 6110. That is the first route. And the second route, if at all it has some kind of clinical benefit, some kind of clinical patient benefit, definitely it should either way go through the same kind of clinical evaluation process that the rest of the devices go. So in the first case, just to add on, you also have to gather the non-clinical and technical. The support will only come from the non-clinical and technical testing. Yeah, Manaswita.
Yes, Priya. So in case it is an accessory, the clinical benefits of the parent device, that means the device, medical device to which this is being used as an accessory, can be used to substantiate those clinical claims. And like you have said, all of the benefits are indirect and can be supported by non-technical claims. Yeah, non-clinical technical claims. Yeah.
Thanks, Manaswita.
All right, let me do one more question. And then we'll wrap up. This is, should the CER contemplate literature data from other manufacturers for comparative purposes, for example, survival rates, or just in cases of equivalence?
Yeah, so if, let's say our claim is the survival rate is high or higher than some kind of benchmark devices, definitely the literature that we should look out for are comparative literature. So definitely the equivalent device is a different story. So if we are claiming equivalence, definitely we have to look out for literature on the equivalent device. But if we are talking about similar device or competitors, definitely if we have to go for the primary comparison that we have to have at the end of or a conclusive statement in the CR, the difference between or the benchmarking that we have from the similar devices in comparison with the data of the device in question.
All right, well, thank you very much. And with that, we're at time. We'll wrap up. We appreciate the questions and hope that this was helpful to you as you're thinking through your strategies for dental devices and EU MDR. Thanks very much.